Welcome to Launch Stories. We're all about connecting and educating Chilliwack's entrepreneurs, and we're so happy to have you here. So thanks to our sponsors for helping us put on these monthly events, Chilliwack Economic Partners, Chilliwack Innovation Network, and UFV. So let's hear it for our sponsors. And we have our partners. These are the folks doing the heavy lifting, recruiting speakers, putting on the event, getting last-minute wraps. And that's Cowork, Chilliwack, Currency Marketing, and Wisebox. Thank you so much. And a special thanks to Elise McAlpine for running all of the AV equipment and recording the show, and you can see her up there. So she knows what every single button does in that room. So I am thrilled to introduce you to our guests this evening. Please give a warm Launch Stories welcome to Heidi Epp and Aly McRae, the co-founders of the Refinery House. Come on up.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for that.
So Heidi, let's start with you.
Oh boy.
Since you put yourself in the hot seat closest to me, I'm going to work that way.
Okay.
So tell me about your background. I know you grew up on a farm, so that was entrepreneurial. But from what I understand, it was mostly directed to the male kids.
Well, yeah, I didn't take over the farm. I do have some experience milking. I grew up on a dairy farm in the area. Yeah, and what that means is that I grew up in a family that was working hard and grinding to make things happen day to day and week to week. And while I had experience in the barn and doing all of the things, I very quickly, from a very early age, remember thinking, I would like to have a job when I grow up where physically I'm not quite as uncomfortable as this, or have to wear those clothes as in barn clothes.
I remember you saying, I don't want to have an outside job.
I don't want to have an outside job.
She doesn't want an outside
I just
job.
learned that real early by grade 4. Yeah, I knew that was not my path. And also, it is my brother's path. So he still exists there.
And you do not have a business degree. You have a...
Let's start there. So my degree, I do have a college degree many, many years ago. I believe I graduated in 2020. No, sorry.
I was like...
I did not graduate 3 years ago. 2000, slipped an extra 2 in there. 23 years ago, made the choice to go for a degree in theology. So I have my very experienced degree in theology, not related at all to business. However, to some degree was and remains useful in the sense of the things that probably drew me to that path in my teen years, this concept of like big picture thinking and these existential questions remain quite current in my constant asking of, what does this mean? And why are we doing this? And what is the purpose? And while I certainly have diverged from the area of theology, it turns out there's like a very limited amount of work in that field, specifically for my gender. My intention always was with that path and that education path was to actually take it to higher education and to get my degree in philosophy and to go into academia. But turns out that would require moving away from Chilliwack, and I got married and quite heavily rooted here. So at some point my path diverged, and there was no straight line to business. So today I'm here to say that that's not necessarily the case for people who are successful in business. It doesn't always start the way it's going to end, and specifically that's probably the story for entrepreneurs. And so my path is not a straight line, but it was a successful one, or has been thus far.
And Aly, you took quite a different path.
I did, yeah. So I grew up in Victoria, and it's always like, where do you begin? So I I think that there were always a million things I wanted to do, and I don't even really think I had thought it all the way through until I sort of got to that realistic end of high school point where you're making plans and coming to the realization of the reality that, like, coming from a lower sort of income threshold, I didn't have the means to. I could have wiggled I knew right away, like, I could find my way through university, but it's going to be a slog the whole way, and I don't know what I want to do yet. And so, knowing that I had a different access and probably a different skill set, that, like, if Heidi didn't want to be inside, or if Heidi didn't want to be outside, I didn't want to be sitting down. So I had always had an interest in, like, I have sort of the classic hairdresser beginning story, which is doing everyone's hair and makeup for every dance and thing, and found my way skipping through. And so I moved to Vancouver and went to hair school early on. But then even within that industry, found sort of barriers and walls in how it felt to work in that industry, and some of the trickier parts of being sort of at the bottom rung, at the starting point in an organization, and having a mind that wants to make things better always. And so it's a long, winding road to find Heidi and to get to Chilliwack, but I think that our uniting point is the way we look at things. And so I think that sometimes I shy away from that beginning part, because I don't, we have family members that hear our stories, and we want to honor them, but at the same time, it's the truth. And I think sometimes when you have people sitting on couches like this, I think about my students, they look at me and they don't always know the kind of start that I had and how much I really was in some of their shoes or ones like them. And so, yeah.
And Heidi, you went from getting your degree to more of a corporate organizational career. And I know you worked for Fraser Health and more on the operations side. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I went, what my degree did was give me a foot in the door. At that point, 20 years ago, having a degree in anything was useful in terms of getting into a management role. So I ended up in management within care facilities in the Fraser Valley, and was operating these facilities, and found that through training and operational efficiency, I was able to manage 3 facilities and 40 staff in the same time that one manager could manage 1 facility. And so I began to realize in my early 20s, there's a thing that I can do in terms of how I'm recognizing what people need in order to be efficient and effective, that is unique. And so I took those skills. I was managing multiple staff and getting experience in the human resource area, and hit a moment where I, like, in my mid-20s, decided this is a thing that might be, if I could take these dreams in my head and start actually executing these ideas from a business perspective, what does that mean? And so then in my mid-20s, launched my first business independently, my first brick-and-mortar store.
Yeah. And that was a boutique downtown Chilliwack, correct?
That's right, yeah. It was called Lello, and I very distinctly remember, being an entrepreneur and taking those moments retrospectively in my mid-20s, it required I needed to find the logic behind taking this risk. And for me, I very distinctly remember telling my parents, listen, I either need to go for another degree that's going to help me move and propel my career forward, or this can be my college. And so as someone who is entrepreneurial, putting money into a business and learning on the ground was one of the best things that I did for my career. It was my college experience those years. Actually doing it, learning how to run the books, learning how to run the systems, learning how to do the ordering, learning how to hire, and all of those things.
Right. And your path, you had moved out to Chilliwack and started a home-based salon, essentially.
Yeah, so for me, even before that, I think when I worked in sort of higher end salons in Vancouver, there was obviously a massive amount of education in just how, I've worked in small salons, I've worked in big salons, and how they're run and the pros and cons of both. So then when I moved to Chilliwack and was ready to start a family, I expected to work in a salon. And so we moved out here, and I just this was 15 years ago, so there were a lot fewer salons, and there wasn't anything in the market that felt like I was going to belong there. And so, and I think I have learned, and especially in hindsight, there was, especially at that time, a lot more home-based salons, which is something that I hadn't seen at all in Vancouver, Victoria, and some of those other cities, where it's definitely a lot less common. So when I moved here, it was sort of like not necessarily something that I decided that I wanted to do, but something that I kind of felt kind of corralled into. That being said, there's great things about that. But since I did that for a time, and then, I don't know, any spoilers, but we started a company.
Well, Heidi ended up in your chair. You were doing.
She sure did, yeah. And we became good friends. But beyond, I think what prepared me to be able to see the kind of partnership that we have now was being a part of other female collectives in Vancouver and in Victoria specifically, where it was just this awareness of an entrepreneurial spirit. And again, coming from a lower income background, choice is less readily available. And so then slowly starting to see this world where we're not having to sacrifice creatively, and we're getting to kind of make our own rules. It's led by women. I don't even know, I think, again, in hindsight, those were all like really important seeds planted in me. But at the time, I think you're just, like Heidi said, what you're doing ends up being your training. And so it's like soaking. I think we both have that ability to just try to like plug in and learn all that we can from whatever's going on, which led me here or there.
A little bit of backstory for you. I had originally asked Heidi to be a guest on this show, and she asked, well, would you mind if I brought my partner, Aly? And I said, wow, that'd be amazing. And my first question was, do you guys have a picture together that you could send me? And I know if I asked a male partnership, I would not get beautiful pictures like this, let alone them being side by side and perfectly fitting into my little box that I was going to put on my promotional material. But I did get a sense right off the bat that you have a very special connection and wildly different skill sets. And so you are the founder / creative director or partner, and you are founder, partner, operations, which I think is like the yin and yang that you need in a business, and it seems pretty special. And so that brings us to the founding of the Refinery House. I did have a conversation with you before, and it being an opaque male that doesn't fully grasp things without further explanation, I want to fully understand what a health and beauty collective is. I go to the barbershop.
Great. You look great.
We love barbershops.
Yes.
I mean, I think so. Actually,
Are you going to give him hair advice right now?
I'm going to start with
Please.
hair.
No. Jump in.
But I was going to say, so when we were setting up this window, we had all the graphics done and they were putting them up, and the installers flipped beauty and health because they thought, there must have been a mistake here. So they put Refinery House, a beauty and health collective, and I don't like to be, as much as it might not seem true, I don't love to be overly bossy. And so I was like, maybe it's fine. It's a lot of work to take it down and put it back up. And then I was like, no, it's not going to work like that, because the beauty part of it comes a lot more easily into people's scope. So as we start to explain it, I think people, whether they're looking in the window or whether they're reading about it or they're looking on our website, it translates most easily. And so we don't have to explain it as much. The union of the two we have to explain, and we also really wanted to make sure that the health was at the forefront, because we believe that like beauty in terms of like wellness is a part of health. Like that's really where they intersect. And we're not talking about beauty in the sense of like a standard that other people have set. And that's a big thing that we have to combat, and having the health be a part of it and actually kind of lead the way is integral.
Yeah, and when we first started, like a health and beauty collective, when people would ask us to speak about this, one of our lines, one of our little pieces of shtick was like, what is a health and beauty collective? We think we made it up.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know of anywhere else that's doing this. I think that that's a phrase we've made up. Whereas in the last number of years, I've seen those words together more and more and more regularly. It's becoming something that's more accepted, that these two pieces are connected and are combined. And maybe just a little bit of a background in terms of why those things matter to the Refinery House. So within the Refinery House, we've got midwives and RCC therapists and a whole host of health facilitators that were there right from the beginning. So people will often say, like, did you have a few extra square feet?
Well, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because I've got a supporting picture that really intrigued me.
Okay,
And it was this picture. When you go into a shop of any sort, they might have a menu board. And so I understand hair and including color, foils and cuts and lash and brow but then midwives, counselors, and naturopath. And it sounds like this was part of the original concept. It wasn't something that sort of tagged on after the fact. But from the get-go, you took this completely seriously. And I think this is a really interesting conversation piece as far as what your offering is.
Yeah, and really what it was always intended to do, which was like bring to question this idea of what beauty is and what is part of this industry of transformation, and that needs to go beyond what we're doing with our hair. Our hair matters because it's on us. It's part of us. And so at no point do we want to diminish it. And also it's part of all of who we are. And so when people are entering into our spaces, that we have indicators right from the outset that the whole of who this person is welcome. And there's ways that we facilitate training our stylists to include these concepts. And while it has maybe captured the attention, and it certainly is something that we're doing differently within this industry, it feels so natural within the spaces. Like, you wouldn't think that these two pieces blend, but they do.
They do.
Because it makes sense.
Totally. And I'm reminded of something that we came up with early on, which was this idea of making like the healthcare practices that, you know, you can find within our spaces more accessible in terms of the approachability. And, you know, what if you didn't have to walk into a more cold clinical space and wait in a waiting room? Like there's anonymity often provided in some of those spaces, but there is a different kind of anonymity provided in a more public space, where if we our receptionists and everybody has some level of training in trauma and awareness of it. And so just even being able to say, hey, Tim, who are you here to see today? Not what are you here to have done, right? We've all had that experience of going to the doctor. And so providing a different kind of access to certain healthcare services, and then providing a little bit more legitimacy to the beauty as a healthcare practice, because there's a link between feeling good and like whatever you want to call looking good, whether we want to talk about it and acknowledge it or not. And so that that sums up sort of how we landed there.
Yeah.
And that's the philosophy and overall arching vision and so forth. If you back up to 2019, you guys are putting together a business and more the nuts and bolts, like did you collect investors? Was this bootstrap? I know you leased a space in Vedder Crossing before, at the front end of Garrison, so I think you picked a good spot to be at. And you decorated it. Did you do that yourself? Talk to me about how did you get this thing off the ground?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to jump in, but then I'm going I'm so glad
You'd
you're
like
here.
me to tell? Well,
I'm
I'd
so
like to
glad
be
you're
here.
here.
Yeah,
I'm really glad that I
glad
asked
you're
him
here.
that question
Yeah.
to bring you. I'll start because I feel like my part of this is pretty insignificant from the launch perspective.
Sure.
So what I did was run the numbers and ensure that financially we were
the
stable
box.
and safe, and that the philosophy was clear, and I knew where our risks were and how to mitigate them. And then really, so a piece of my story, and then it will be your turn, I promise, because yours is
fine.
better.
Okay, fine.
But part of my story is that in between this first retail experience that I had in between selling that first business and having a couple kids, I had been operating a consultation service in the interim where I was working with different businesses to ensure that their systems were operationally smooth. And so this was a thing that I basically was implementing at the time in 2016 for the Refinery House. And one of the things that I had learned since my mid-20s was, if something is going to work, then the numbers should provide information for that. But also it shouldn't be terribly, terribly hard if you're picking the right people. And she was spoiler, she was a great choice. Great choice as a partner.
has to say that now.
Yeah, but from nuts and bolts perspective, we have that space because Aly, I don't know if she'll tell you this, she parked her minivan
I was gonna go straight to the
outside of.
minivan.
Were you going to tell this story?
No, go for it.
Because she parked that minivan outside that space.
It was
and
more of like
waited.
a lap. It was more that I
She
did
drove
laps, I would say.
around and around, waiting to see who would go into that so she could accost them.
That building. Well, I think the reality is, and we have told the story in different spaces, but finding our first brick, like to prove your for an unproven concept,
Yeah.
to find your first brick and mortar was not as easy as it might sound, or maybe not. I just think everything should be easy.
She does.
I do think that. And so, time after time, I would talk to people, and then you'd tell them what it was, and it was like, oh, okay, well, and I won't go into all of it, but there were some pretty condescending moments that I didn't love. And so then I was like, fine, I'm going to figure it out myself. And so it was a lot of dropping kids off at school and lurking in parking lots and seeing there was finally this one space, who owns this? And it had changed hands. And so the one such day, I was just sort of like, okay. And then I saw someone coming out of it, and shout out to Theo Kirchhoff, our first landlord. I just jumped out and said who I was and what we were wanting to do, and credit to him, we shook hands in the parking lot, and he was like, okay. And he could have easily found a
Reneged.
more proven concept to lease that to, but he said he would, and he is a man of his word. So, So our first location, that was in 2016.
It was 650 square feet at the time.
It was, and we did everything ourselves. We don't have investors. It's been the two of us since the get-go, and we figured out the parameters business-wise. I did the design work. And then we've just sort of found like-minded people along the way, and we started with 2 other employees other than ourselves, and then it's just sort of like a snowball collected. I think we're nearly up to about 40 people now, and
So that space was a former CIBC branch.
it
That's
was
right. It was
off the
Bikram
corner
yoga.
of yes, that's right. Off the corner of Keith Wilson and Vetter, and then it was a yoga
It was, yeah.
space.
And I said it started as 650. We pleaded with Theo.
Stole his boardroom.
We took his boardroom. So now it's like 750, but it's
Got
still
it.
not. It's still very small. It's,
very, very
it's
small.
our smallest
It's
location
big,
for
yeah.
sure. And this is it.
Yes. Yep.
That's the whole thing right there. No.
And so you opened that in 2016.
That's right,
So that's
yeah.
now 7-ish years ago. And then you opened Abbotsford, which is a 1,600 square foot facility in 2019.
19. Almost 20.
Right.
Yep.
How did
Little did we know.
Little did we know what was coming in 2020.
right? How did that impact you? It impacted everybody, obviously.
Huge. Yeah,
Huge.
huge. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to. Business is scary, and that was just another thing.
And another thing that was tied to public. So we have midwives who even the salon was impacted obviously by having to close for a chunk of time and then figuring out ways to work within the new PPE guidelines. Midwives, they're an essential service, so they were
still operating,
exhausted in a different way. It was just, I mean, we were all there.
In preparing for this interview, I was checking out all of your stuff and landed on your YouTube channel, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
And there's a video of, I believe it's yourself, teaching Heidi how to cut her husband's hair.
Yes. That's worth a view. That's worth a view. Yeah. We did do that in quarantine.
Sometimes people think Heidi does hair.
I don't.
She doesn't.
At all.
At all.
I needed
with lessons.
Help. Yeah.
Has Tim been a returning customer? Her husband's name
he
is also
prefers to go to the salons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It was probably my lessons.
I
quite
feel
up to
quite
snuff.
equipped. I think I could be helpful.
It's definitely me problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you now have 3 working salons.
Yeah, so
and I'm not sure, is this in Abbotsford or is this the district?
This is actually Vetter.
Vetter, okay, the same.
So this is Vetter, and
Got
then
it.
Abbotsford in 2019, and then our district space opened in 2021.
Now, going
Just-
from 1 to 2 locations that are 30 minutes apart, how did you manage that?
Yeah, so that's part of the exercise, is learning how to implement these systems further and further and further away. And as we grow, you and I spoke about this really briefly in the hallway one day about this difference between 5 to 10 staff,
Right.
and then going from 10 to 30 is a totally different animal. And so one of the challenges right in the middle of COVID, essentially, we opened Abbotsford opened just before COVID, district opened during COVID at some point. At the same time as this was happening, we're implementing all of these new COVID procedures and sorting out how to develop really clear human resource structures within these spaces to be able to ensure that operations are safe, essentially, for people and consistent and clear for both clients and for our staff.
Totally. And I think we both just also we know loosely where we want to go, and so it was just sort of a necessary part of it. And I think that there's a lot of ways that Chilliwack and Abbotsford kind of function together. So maybe I don't know if we underestimated how hard it would be, but I think that we enter into a lot of things just like,
We'll figure
how
it
hard can it be? We'll figure it out. And with a lot of optimism. So
Yeah.
And I think from the sounds of it, you're given the freedom to work on the business as opposed to in the business.
Yeah,
and
that's
that's a key part, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm not in the spaces other than stopping in and getting things done as needed.
as a customer,
No, but I'm in the office doing whatever needs to be facilitated. And that's the thing about being an entrepreneur, is it's quite exciting, right? Like my opportunities in terms of work, I can bounce from every department within the company, from planning and strategy to marketing and development, and
And you have a really crystal clear idea from a creative director standpoint, so much so that you decided to open your own training facility to facilitate what the folks that are going to work in these salons.
yeah.
Just one more thing.
Yeah, one more thing. We just thought but yeah, so that was early on. That was actually between location 1 and 2, and I think again, maybe just our optimistic natures. I can remember being in hair school, and I knew that I couldn't just start teaching it right away. But I think that's just always a little bit how my brain's worked. Is like, how can I figure out the easiest, best way to do that? And then that naturally became an awareness of, okay, that's something that other people are struggling with, and we have newer, younger staff coming on. There's a natural, obviously, mentorship role there, but how do you carve out time from a full schedule? So it's just been a collaborative thing. I don't come by delegation, honestly, or easily, and Heidi's quite good at it. So I feel like there's just, we could talk for the entire show about ways we've benefited each other, I think, personally and professionally. But in terms of for the Refinery House, I might have been sort of in a more classic entrepreneurial, stuck in this role that I don't want to ever give away, that only I know how to do, right? And that isn't good for anybody. So naturally, we we just knew that we needed to do this. And again, just like, well, how hard can Abbotsford be? Like, we'll just get a PTI designation, and we'll just open a hair school. Right, Heidi?
That's right.
That's all.
It'll just be that
Let's
easy.
do it.
Just
So
file those
what does a hair
those
school look
paperwork.
like? Is it how long would a student be in the academy?
What the school looks like is very nice, because Aly designed the way the whole feel of it goes. So from colors to chairs, it looks like one of the Refinery Houses. The school looks beautiful thanks to Aly. We tend to find cool spaces. Again, thanks to Aly. There's a reason that she's our creative director. She is driving her vehicles around looking for things. And then in terms of what the program looks like, I mean, the intention around being a private training institute is to really establish a foundation under any of our enterprises that enables us to train from a human resource perspective. So whether it's hair or whether it's payroll and medical office assistants, that the intention is that we have the foundation in order to run those programs through in a way that's legitimized by the province of Canada.
Well, and just to jump in quickly, I think a lot of the things
Province of Canada? Did I just say that?
It's,
Oh, boy.
I think it's a brand. I think it's like
It is a brand. It's a sweater.
It's a sweater.
It's a sweater.
It's like
It wasn't totally
apparel. It's fine.
Yeah.
It exists.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is, I don't know anymore. because
sorry.
it sidetracked me.
I did. But in terms of the program, so what it looks for students, one of the things that we really believe in is efficiency in terms of training. Efficiency everywhere, right? Like, clearly that's a thing that's important to me. I like efficiency in operations and systems, and our hair program is no different. And so we condense this sucker into 6 months part-time and know that we are educating, like, they're coming out. My management team won't even hire from outside of our school at this point.
That's not true. If anyone's listening, that's not true.
They prefer, they just
easier.
know that the ones that are coming out of our place have received the training.
But I think that that's part of it, is that we were finding that the kind of humans that we needed, with the kind of training that we needed them to have across the board, the training didn't seem to be accessible in the Valley, and so that's a big problem for us, right? If we can't solve that, and if we have to train everybody one-on-one, that's also taxing. So having to, go to BCIT or go to a hair school or whatever the training might be, like out of your city and especially out of your entire area or the Valley, we lose people to that, right? Victoria lost me to that. I had every intention of moving back, but if we want to keep like our citizens working here and living here and thriving here, then we have to be able to also provide them with training.
Yeah.
So how are you getting students? Are they word of mouth? Are you actively marketing it?
Yeah, it was initially word of mouth, and I mean, marketing is something that it has come slowly for us. We've been busy doing a lot of other things, and so the vast majority of this has been built on reputation locally, and the program is it's a 6-month part-time, enables people to also have work outside of it.
Yeah, accessibility is a big part of it, right? If you have to stop what you're doing, move to Vancouver, find an apartment, like there's so many barriers to that, like that's really difficult. And so if we can make sure that someone can work part-time, and then they can stay where they live in the city that they grew up in or want to live in, that helps everybody, at least the option.
And as part of the sales pitch or the reason someone would go to your school versus others is that they could potentially get a job at one of your salons. Is that
that's
inferred, or is that kind of part of the way that it works?
It's both.
It's both.
I mean, it is inferred, and it's the way the work,
and it's hoped
the way
for.
and it's hoped for. It really is.
We usually start by we can't promise everybody jobs. We are already building salons at an alarming rate. We can't. That's like we're only bound by like our own hands. But so I say we can't promise everybody a job. Period. But our goal is that we would desire to keep everybody, that everybody, we should be like devastated to let you go at the end of this program. And I think because we're, again, tied back to our own selves, and we do hire as many as we can out of the program, it keeps our standards, it doesn't let us get lazy, right? We know that we're putting out, whether it's to our own kind of lower level stylists or whether it's to other salons, we're trying to put out the best stylists that we can imagine. So.
Mm-hmm. I took a look at your website, and this is a doozy of a page. You have to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. There's close to 40 people now working at multiple locations and positions and so forth. And the common thread was that it is all female at this point. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges, obviously, of a female-run business? You mentioned landlords maybe not taking you for...
Not Theo.
Theo gets a full
Theo gets
gold stars.
Gold star for Theo.
Yeah.
But that does definitely come up. I mean, it's also it's hard to. It's tempting to pin an awful lot of stuff on that. But what are the biggest? I think I'm sure you'll have your own answer, but that is a question that we used to get a lot with a different tone, and it used to be a lot of like, well, all women like must be tricky, and that luckily has sort of just naturally gone away. And I think also we've been pretty clear about like, we don't think that's funny, we don't think that's true. That kind of trope is really old, and it's not hard. There are difficult things about business, and there's difficult things about masculinity and femininity.
Well, let's flip it on its head then, and what are the advantages?
Well, we can answer it too. There are things, but I just more mean like I appreciate. I guess I should say I appreciate that you're not asking it in a tongue-in-cheek way,
right.
Which is to suggest that it must be so hard because of insert the cliche, right?
So. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. I've worked in a number of different business environments, and what I know, just a little bit further to that, what I know to be true is that the challenges within human resources really are rooted in the same. It's the same. It's human issues, and so whether you're dealing with management, no matter where you are, it's management issues, and people typically just don't have the experience. There's not typically large teams of women-led companies, and so I think both Aly and I come from a history of like having really healthy and good relationships with like multiple like groups of women, and that it didn't come. It's come quite naturally.
Yeah, the issues have been natural to any growing organization that I don't think are gender based. I will say though, there are those things, and it would be maybe more in the line of like, we can all see that this is here. We have 2 women founders that both have families, and when it comes to things like we were talking about sick kids or maternity leaves and all of these kinds of things, like we take that really seriously in terms of if we can't provide, if the 2 of us and what we represent can't provide a viable way for women to remain in or pop out and then come back into the workforce, then like we're all doomed. Like if we can't figure it out in our small little ecosystem that we created, then we have a really big problem. And so we've made that a really big priority. So I wouldn't call that a problem, but it's maybe a unique challenge, given that it is like so vastly female.
Yeah.
Well, and I think obviously you're having huge success, and to a degree it's a superpower. Like your ability to understand who your market is, who build a unique solution that didn't exist before. I think that came from your collective insights, really, and it just seems really unique in like systems, and then you've got the creative, and it's just like a perfect marriage. On that front, I know you 2 are married and have families. Is there any jealousy from your spouses about how close
Connected
and synergetic you
and
are?
Much we truly like each other.
I don't think so.
Not necessarily jealousy,
Yeah,
but like,
we know what you mean. Yeah.
But I think that there's something that has happened that feels like such a privilege in this time that really enables so many different kinds of relationships. And so, I mean, we are strongly connected. I rely on her. She relies on me. This really does spring from a well-connected, like, relationship. I was going to say friendship, but it feels like not sufficient. So I think that this day that enables these relationships, like my husband benefits from our connection in our business and our relationship,
And
my kids benefit from it, and sometimes there's public confusion about what this is.
What kind of partners we are. That is true.
One of our first, I remember.
All right, honesty moment.
Okay.
When I got your really close pictures together,
Where we
I
were
did go
only
to
touching?
Facebook to try to see if I could suss out.
What it was.
going on here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it was. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of our meeting recently with our friend Robert, an accountant that works with us, and he said mid-meeting, mostly my clients don't sit that close together.
Yeah.
In our meetings.
we're
You know
comfortable.
what? It's fine.
But and if you are curious, it has leached through all of our, there's lots of, memes out there about toxic work cultures that pretend to be your family, which always make me cringe a little. But we really do have a family-like workplace in terms of, again, it wouldn't be honest if we weren't. We want our clients to feel safe to bring their whole selves there. That requires us to do that in this partnership. That requires us to do that with our managers and our employees and their coworkers and our clients. It's a good kind of contagious, where I think when we do that, it's better for, like Heidi said, our kids, our husbands, our friends, our just community generally.
And I think one of the things that if I had to say what feels beautiful and different about the fact that this is women-led or Aly and I-led, I don't even know if that's what it is, but the amount of work, being an entrepreneur and being in business is vulnerable. It just is. It's scary. We're constantly on the edge of risk. We're dreaming together, and to work really intentionally on the kind of vulnerability that it requires to do that in a way that's sustainable and nice to be with, rather than mean to be with, requires so much. I can't even say effort. It just requires so much intentionality. And again, it comes back to that health and beauty part. Like the fact that we have therapists who are working with us.
Our very own actual therapists as well.
who are working with us to be able to stay present in that vulnerability and in those fear moments and in the sad moments and in the wins, and then to have the privilege of having someone to walk through all of those things with in a way that, we've been in business together for 7 years, friends for, I always get this wrong, but friends for who
75,
knows.
yeah.
It's such a privilege to be, and to not deny or not ask our team to deny the kind of relationships that are really impacting this thing that's growing.
And also, I think not to be afraid of that vulnerability allows us to have a probably unfair amount of fun at work.
It's true.
And
if there's one thing that our husbands are jealous
maybe
of,
jealous
it is
of,
true that we have a lot.
It doesn't sound like we're working very much, but we kind of.
So there's for sure been are you working or are you not working? And it's hard to do. It's hard.
Meeting?
You mentioned the word intentionality, and it seems like everything that you've done is very intentional. And I know you took the step of becoming a certified B Corporation.
Yes.
For those that aren't aware of what a B Corp is, can you give us the...
She needs a drink of water first.
That,
It's
you know
what,
it's a big deal. She's
I'm
gonna have
still
a nap,
tired.
a quick nap.
I've got a PTI certification and a B Corp certification, and I'm tired.
And Aly, there's water by your
Oh,
foot there if you
I'm not tired.
need it. So.
I didn't do the paperwork, so.
The B Corp. That was a
Tell us
journey.
what it is, Heidi. What
that
is
was
it?
a journey. Okay, so a B Corp certification is a intense third-party certification that essentially stamps our company as that we're the world, essentially the world, our community, our employees, ourselves, our families, and the world is better for having us in it. And in order to verify that, they ask me everything about the company and every single record that we could ever have. And it is essentially like, I mean, if there was taking your clothes off in front of a certification, this is it from a business perspective. They look through every financial, they look through our payroll system, they look through the way we're managing our waste, our future policies, our human resource policies.
Everything in and everything out, essentially.
And the B stands for benefit.
Benefit.
So it has, this company, this entity needs to be a net benefit to the world.
And not just to me or to Abby.
And I think a lot of the other all certifications in this lane are great, but a lot of them are saying like, we don't do this, we don't do that, and those are really important.
Why did you go for this? Why was it important?
So I think it's important to companies for a couple of different reasons, but for us, knowing that this was not only the way that we were setting the company up, but the way that we intended on growing and developing it, it was such a good way for us to communicate what we were trying to do without using all of the words about how nice we were. This is something that can just verify. A third party has said
it's an independent body that's
They've
measuring.
looked through the ways that we're donating to our community and to our charity, and not just that. So many things that this was a way that we could communicate what it was we were trying to do, part of our purpose. And it was, I mean, it's hard to get. I've said that. We're the only salon in Canada, to my knowledge, that has the certification, or I should say, a salon-affiliated business that has the certification. Obviously, we do more than just hair. It's just primarily, at this point, what we're known for. And I think that there was one other in the States at the time that I had it certified. So it's a big deal to anyone who cares to look. And so for our employees to even hear this, that this legitimately, like, it's not just for us.
Mm-hmm. And it's not saying what we don't do. It says this is what we do. This is what we're planning on doing. This is our future projections. This is like what's in large part
guiding the way we're making these decisions and these choices.
So it sounds like it was a combination of like passion and vision, and this is the right thing to do. But is there a business bonus to doing this?
I mean, that's the experiment. Right. And so we started this, like I started the certification probably prior to the opening of our school in 2017 or 18. So right from the outset, I had started to flow our company records towards this model. Is there a benefit from a business perspective? I'm going to say my guess is yes. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is a way, and this is the experiment, for businesses, and us specifically, to operate in a way that doesn't compromise our ethics and our morality, and even elevates, because this doesn't need to be about ethics and morality, but it can be about purpose. And so I don't think that leading with purpose needs to be a detriment to revenue. I think that there's a way to do this that can generate revenue. From a business perspective, revenue tends to matter to people who are putting the financials together, and also, I think it can be both. And so
I think it's a really interesting discussion. Not to cut you off, but because on the one hand, you have like we're growing up in an age now where we see venture capital and all these tech and tech-enabled businesses that are raising funds on the basis that their sole purpose is to 10 times, 100 times people's investment. Yeah. And I know that one major tech firm became a B Corp, and it kind of stunned the industry, and that was Kickstarter, which was on this rocket ship of and the founder basically said, you know what, that's not my end game. To his investors, that was probably not a comfortable conversation, but it's ethical,
and I think that's
right?
one of the things is it naturally helps you align, case in point, right? And moving forward, that's like our customers, our consumers generally, our employees. These are whether it's environmental sustainability or just like sustaining life and business within that, like, and the lives that you could scroll through that screen. it's hard to imagine that it can't be beneficial because it's sort of like inherent in the title and it's inherent in what we're measuring. And so if we believe that, if you can read through that and believe that that matters, then it just has to have a positive outcome at the end.
Yeah, and I would say from an employee standpoint, from a potential customer standpoint, especially younger that are Gen Z and they're so clued into all the bad things that the older generations have done. And you're not beholden to investors. From what I understand, this is a bootstrap business and you're plowing ahead based on profitability and not mythical unicorn status and all this stuff,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And
true. And I think that when it comes to the point, because if we are to execute the next number of years and move on through our 5 and 10-year plan, investors are going to be a part of it. And so the experiment will continue. And I think that I don't just think that this is a trend in terms of marrying purpose and goodness and benefit to business. I think that it's the way of, might I even say it's the way of the future.
But exactly, it very well may, and I think even should, influence the kind of investor that would be interested in us, that we would be interested in, vice versa. Because if that isn't a core value, or at least a high value, then we're just not going to be able to see eye to eye.
Speaking of core values, you did mention one, and it was your number one core value.
Yes.
And I've written it down, so I have a note, and it was called riding dirty.
Yes, that's right.
It's a good one to
There's even a
explain.
song that goes along with it.
Yeah, we won't play it.
Or sing it.
Or sing it.
Yeah. Riding dirty, man. So we've got 3 core values, and this is number 1, and I can't see it going anywhere. It's this acknowledgement. It's not ride or die. It's not like in it till we are like crushed and dying together. But it really is an acknowledgement that things are going to get messy. Things in business are going to get messy, and if you come here and if you join us and if you join our team, we're going to get dirty. It's literally how we play. Pretty fast. And are we in it? Can we be in it together? It's so much safer. It's so much more fun. It's so much more engaging when we're in it together. And that's the core concept of what riding dirty is. And it wasn't from us. I think that that's part of what's beautiful to me about our core values is that these are values, riding dirty, people first, and a mindset of abundance. These are values that our team came up with in a session together. And so, or in sessions together, we even let them exist beyond any one session. But yeah, riding dirty, acknowledging that things are going to get messy.
So you mentioned 3 core values, and I counted 5 words. I think that's awesome that you can not only remember them but articulate them, and so can your staff probably, right?
Yeah.
So, the next piece I want to talk to you about is philanthropy. I know that's been a key part, and perhaps that's rooted in where you came from and your family and your faith, but you had some photos you sent. With matching T-shirts, I might add.
Yes.
Accidental.
Where you've done
Accidental
some
magic.
Always copying me.
Well, you
community
know
and
what?
charitable work. I know you personally are on the board of a nonprofit. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So I'm on the board of an organization called Himalayan Life. That's where this picture is from. And part of that like big picture is this big picture thinking, this like questioning why is also it was imparted to me, this belief system, and certainly like in our world there's freedom for those to change, and certainly mine have evolved and grown, but this belief that is like still so present that we have the power to make a difference, and we have a power to really make an impact in both community and international work. And so this ability to connect with this particular organization that is doing vastly mind-blowing things, like way beyond what I have been able to impact in this Chilliwack community. They're such an inspiration to me in terms of high quality output. So this is one organization we work with called Himalayan Life. I also sit on the board of directors for a foundation that we were part of starting, which is called Fresh Bread, which helps provide access to mental health services within the community and internationally. And sit on some other boards as well, one with you
That you might know about.
that you might be aware of.
And I
That's
think
true.
that's another area where like our skill sets are opposite and then lead us to the same places. So like when Heidi brought Himalayan life to my awareness, I had been hosting annual events for a charity called Acts for Water, and came at it naturally from the more creative side of it, of like hosting a party and raising money from that end. And so then it's just been a like non-negotiable. It's more like where and what do we want to spend that time and energy and focus and money on, not like if and there is, as we can all know, no shortage of things.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said so clearly that's always stuck with me is like there's so many issues. I might think like there's so much to do. There's so much suffering. Where does one even begin? And Aly's philosophy of we start with the thing that's in front of us has been so useful to me. And it still is. It's still sometimes things. It's still what I think about when it feels discouraging and overwhelming. Like we can start with the thing that's in front of us, and so it keeps us moving forward. And this doesn't consume our day to day. We're not. This is all volunteer work, but as part of our, like if you go onto our website and find our sustainability, what's it called? Sustainability manifesto report. There it is. Our work on there will be listed on there as well.
Yeah, and then there's always like again, it's like we will have Wilma's. We like you start a doorway. Like there's a million. There's we could have that. It could be a delightful full-time job.
Now, I won't ask you where you're going to be in 5 years, or what will your financials look like, or how many locations will you have, or
She wouldn't tell you if
employees.
you did ask.
Right, because you told me you won't tell me that. But when you think of 5-10 years down the road, what impact do you hope you will have?
I hope that we continue together to push the edges of what's possible, to keep dreaming things into life that haven't existed before, to keep pushing ourselves to take new risks and ask new questions. So part of the start of the Refinery House is this question of like, what if? What happens if we take health and like truly marry it with beauty? Like, what if? And I think that question for me, like, what if in my early 20s, I remember launching my first business and being consumed with what if? Like, what if? It's the same question, but there's a dark side to it, right? And so the anxiety-ridden, what if all of these terrible things happen? And so living in the land, having found my way to this land of possibility, of continually asking the question of what's possible? Like what's possible in this community, and what's possible with business, and what's possible if we do, what if we spin it this way? And so I hope that over the next 5 to 10 years that we continue to surprise ourselves and maybe our employees in a less dramatic way. They were surprised.
They were sick of surprises.
They were
for a
sick
while,
of the multiple stores for a bit. But yeah,
I think like we're still flushing out our mission statement, but what we know is that it involves the word freedom. And so when I think about both of our stories, but I'll just choose mine for the moment, I've always, maybe my grandma was somebody that would, I was like, I can make that. I can make that for every single thing. And I have, whether it's good or bad, I have inherited that gene. And so I think when I think about, like I liked what you said about continuing to surprise ourselves and being able to see, like I think we saw things in ourselves that weren't necessarily super accessible in terms of like we weren't being seen by other people and drawn out of us. And so my hope is that we can get to continue doing that with our staff and our managers, and like getting to elevate ideally everything and everyone around us, and seeing potential where it might not be flashing lights, and getting to provide freedom
and
in all the kinds of ways. Yeah.
Right? Like there's so much freedom that comes from being able to provide opportunities. And so this came out at our last retreat. Like for my personal next 5 to 10 years, if I can continue to create opportunities for people, That's my mission. And from Refinery House perspective, I hope that it continues to evolve, that in 5 to 10 years, it's known for what it is. Now, that's still present, but that it's known for more and more as we continue to let it, nurture it, and grow it. And
I think when
ask
we were
the right
having our
questions.
chat with you before, we were kind of saying, like, our mission, it's not a mission statement. What is it?
I don't know.
Getting better at
being who we are, our core value statement.
Core value statement. There we go. Is getting better at who we already are. And I think that is the continued mission for Refinery House too, is it already is what it is. We're kind of just like unearthing it and helping it grow and bringing on new people to help us do that as well. But it's getting better at what it already is too. And so just like letting kind of the reins of it go and letting more people have paddles. There's a lot of metaphors happening in here, but you get the idea.
and my job is then to take that and put it into a business plan.
Yes. And there you have it.
And that's how it, and that's
And
how it
there you
works.
have it. Let's hear it for Heidi and Aly.